Boobs! Now that I have your attention, let's talk about fictional fruit. Fictional fruit that can create boobs, so don't you worry, it all comes full circle. Because this is the siksik fruit, a very recent addition to our devil fruit encyclopedia, which has gone criminally under-recognized. Because what if I told you that this devil fruit could do so much more than just turning your homie into your waifu? What if I told you that this fruit could do not just one thing, but in fact all of the things? I often make audacious claims about devil fruits breaking One Piece, but this might be the first time that it's actually true, because Doku's ability allows him to use the power of every other devil fruit in existence. It's absolutely incredible, in both meanings of the word actually, both amazing and not credible. Let me explain, but first, feminization. A brief overview of the siksik fruit is that it allows Doku to craft diseases conjured from his very questionable imagination, and during its series debut, Doku decided that his inaugural contagion would be the quote feminization disease, which was used to transform Trafalgar Law into Trafalgar. It's very similar to the application of Emporio Ivankov's devil fruit, just better because you can inflict this transformation on a target from a distance. And assumedly you could also inflict the condition on yourself as well if you so desired. And because it's what you're all thinking, here's Doku with breasts. You're welcome. Now a lot of people miss this because they're a bit too focused on that Trafalgar chest, but Beppo also gets affected by the disease as well, which reminds me of chapter 582, when Beppo and the Heart Pirates were parked on the outskirts of Amazon Lily, and Beppo wondered if there were any female polar bears on the island. Oda's foreskinning is simply unmatched, but essentially it was used for a gag. Law grows breasts, and Penguin and Shanchi grow erections, and devastating hilarity ensues. But with that in mind, this is a very serious devil fruit. Law refers to Doku's abilities as a contagion, meaning that it functions as a communication of a disease from one person or organism to another via close contact. And this is important because the spread is simple enough, but we need a patient zero for that to actually happen in the first place. Currently, it's unexplained exactly how the disease is manifested. However, my personal scientific analysis is that Doku casted it, sort of like a magic spell. Despite the definition of contagion, Doku uses this ability from quite the distance. He himself, assumedly, did not come into contact with any of the Heart Pirates physically because they were in their submarine at the time. So the fruit has a very interesting interaction with seawater as well. Doku's abilities penetrated the sea waters and took effect. It's even potentially implied that the disease may have been spread by the water, because the order of events is that the Blackbeard pirates breach the submarine, water starts pouring in, and then Law becomes afflicted with the feminization disease. Although it's probably much simpler than that. Doku chose a target for his fruit abilities, in this case Law, and he could do this because of, fruit or haki, whatever. Law then becomes patient zero, and the disease spreads rapidly, like almost instantly. Law transformed in the snap of a finger, really, and the other Heart Pirates weren't far behind. Now just imagine how devastating that would be if we, say, chose another disease to create. Perhaps one less ha-ha funny and more, well, I guess just not funny. Diseases aren't historically funny. Now I have a special term for Doku's ability, which is that he is the proud consumer of a multi-fruit, the definition of which is a devil fruit that grants the abilities of multiple individual fruits, or a range of wildly unconnected abilities all rolled into one. Usually these take the form of insanely broken paramecias or mythical zoans. And one classic example is Viola. She has a multi-fruit that allows her to read minds, observe everything within a 4-kilometer radius, and even cry molten whale tears. She can also x-ray people and see through their clothes, so it's a 4-part multi-fruit, which until now was the most ridiculous I thought we could go. But Viola's fruit looks humble compared to this. Doku, with one application of this devil fruit, has mimicked the core abilities of Ivankov's Horuhoru no Mi. And at the moment, I don't see any reason why Doku couldn't use the siksik fruit to mimic the conditions of any other devil fruit. On paper, this could be one of, perhaps even the best devil fruit in the series. There's just no way around that if he has the potential to mimic any effects that can just, be fashioned into a disease. For example, imagine coming down with a case of Noro Noro, which would be Doku manifesting Foxy's powers to make his opponents move 30 seconds slower. 30 seconds being a very long time. And I guess the gag would be that even though Doku's opponent is moving so slowly, it puts them on a more or less even battleground because Doku himself naturally moves so slowly and has to often drag himself across the floor. Also, any body manipulation devil fruit is on the table. How about, say, a rubberization disease, where everyone's body becomes rubber, just like Luffy's, which would actually be pretty devastating because it took Luffy an entire childhood just to acclimatize himself to his new body. Before that, it was pretty useless and arguably made him even weaker than he was in the beginning. Or give someone Bellamy's spring powers and then watch them struggle with their newfound spring legs. And you know what? Let's even take Very Good's ability and just turn people into balls. You've come down with a case of balls. Yeah, you're balls now. So this is probably a bit counter to how we would typically think of diseases, but I actually find it much more interesting to think of Doc Q as someone who could potentially buff other members of the Blackbeard Pirates with beneficial diseases. Because really, the feminization disease wasn't actually a threatening issue. At best, what it achieved was sowing confusion in a dire situation that required concentration on non-breast related issues. And this could be amazing because it could give the Blackbeard Pirates to essentially fight with two fruit powers, much like their captain. For example, let's say we've got Vasco Shot going up against good old Sanji Man, which is probably not an amazing matchup for Mr. Shot. And so Vasco Shot bequeaths Doc Q to buff him with a disease, and in this case we can go with the tried and tested feminization disease. Vasco Shot becomes a woman and Sanji is rendered incapable of fighting him, or her I should say. Shot can then spread this disease to however many other crew members are around Sanji, and he becomes effectively powerless. After which point all of the Blackbeard Pirates could then finish Sanji with a collective group happiness punch. I guess that would be more like a happiness Gatling gun. But a lot of the Straw Hats have similar weaknesses as well. Like say Nami, she finds it very difficult to harm children, so let's turn our allies into kids through the childification disease. And Zoan fruits are also very much on the table. You could buff crew members by cursing them with the I just became a vicious lion rah disease, or you could even debuff enemies with the oh no, now I'm an axolotl disease. Now there are a few fruits which Doc Q would probably be unable to mimic, but it's not many. Environmentally based paramecias are probably out of the question. Stuff like Morley's push fruit, which is entirely dedicated to manipulating the environment, or any of the pocket dimension abilities, like Brulee's Mirror World or Bluno's Door World, would also likely be impossible. But there really aren't that many paramecias that exclude a body effect. And Logias, they are a big question mark. Scientifically, it is of course possible to create artificial paramecia and Zoan abilities, so that makes them quite easily open to Doc Q. But there is currently no way to create artificial Logias, so they may be more difficult if not outright impossible to fashion into a disease if the disease is any way dependent on biological feasibility. The closest you could possibly get would be trying to mimic say the Maramaranomi and instead creating the I've just spontaneously caught fire and it won't stop, please help disease. However, Doc Q's use of the fruit so far has been a bit controversial on the internet. To demonstrate, here's a Reddit thread titled Doc Q, why this bum will be the worst devil fruit user ever. Doc Q ate the most overpowered paramecia in the series. It is hands down stronger than the Op-Op and the Hobby fruit. It allows him to create diseases that seemingly just say no to natural convention, and he uses it to turn the heart pirates female. Doc, how does that help? How does giving Law a nice rack do anything? And the user then goes on to give a very long list of genuinely horrific conditions that plague humanity in real life, which I guess Doc Q could have used on Law, so why didn't he just do that? And you know, it's a good question and one that I have an answer for, but it's at the forefront of people's minds because diseases are an especially potent topic in One Piece. Ultimately, it was a disease that sealed the fate of the Pirate King, the one thing that Roger could not overcome. And if a disease can beat him, then it can take out anyone. But this fruit, despite its near infinite versatility, also has some pretty extreme limitations, both within the logic of the world and within the context of One Piece being a story. The most obvious limitation is that it's very likely that every disease has the exact same cure, which is Haki. And it's very appropriate that it was a doctor who discovered this cure, but after Law injects himself with those delicious Hakis, Doc Q elaborates on his own abilities. Once he's broken through, his antibodies will spread, just as the illness did, which is a pretty colossal weakness because the implication is that it just takes the Haki of one person to break the whole disease. Then their cure, their Haki, will spread around to everyone just like the disease did. Or perhaps it's just the Haki of the patient zero, which would mean you'd need to choose that target very carefully. It's a pretty rough weakness though, because it means that this fruit isn't likely to be in any way effective on the top tier combatants. The only way I could see it working on say Luffy is if he forgets or doesn't realize that he can use Haki anymore. And it's good general policy to not have your win condition being the opponent forgetting how to fight. But probably the biggest weakness is our next factor. So I can actually answer that Redditor's question about not using real conditions. Doc Q did not do that because Eiichiro Oda has a policy of not using real diseases or health conditions anywhere in One Piece. Every illness we've encountered is purely fictional. In the SBS of Volume 32, a reader comments on the cure Noland found for the Shandian tribe, asking if the cure was based on a similar concept in real life, to which Oda said, yes, it does exist. However, the wood fever that I described in the story does not exist, so have no fear. Covering topics about diseases is always delicate, as there is the chance that people will find it too upsetting or it has too deep a historical context. And that's why we're never going to see a situation where, say, Doc Q gives Nami leukemia, because it's a real condition. People have it, or people know someone who has had it, or people know someone who have had similar things, or people have similar things. So it risks really breaking the immersion of One Piece and seriously upsetting upsetting some of your audience members. So the most key limitation is that Doc Q's diseases will always be entirely fictional, which I actually believe is a huge benefit to One Piece, because it means that Oda isn't restricting himself to the raw logic of disease functionality. It gives him the freedom to do whatever it is he thinks is the most fun thing to do at the time and use this as an excuse. For example, let's just imagine the final conflict with the Blackbeard pirates. The Straw Hats arrive on Hachinosu, everyone hops off the Sunny and launches their fun pirate attack. Everyone, with the exception of Usopp, that is, because all of a sudden, oh no, he's been struck by Doc Q, who has afflicted him with the I can't go on this island disease, which I think would be fantastic because it's another Usopp lie that becomes reality. And it would also give Usopp an opportunity to overcome his own cowardice in a very literal way, because this is the disease that you used to use as an excuse, and now it's here for real. Overcome it. But it is a very common thing to see someone asking, well, why doesn't Doc Q just give Luffy stage 4 cancer or an inoperable brain tumor? And it's just like, mate, remember that this is our fun pirate adventure. But we're not done with limitations just yet. Certain devil fruits in One Piece also need a user with a very specific skill set to make any decent use of. Trafalgar Law is a great example of this. The Opi Opi no Mi would still be insane in anyone's possession, but you can only really use its full potential if you have a background as a surgeon. The previous user of Law's fruit was also said to be a miraculous doctor. So Doc Q might only be able to conjure these weird specific diseases because he has that knowledge of biology and medicine. So that allows him to imagine the exact conditions required to perform such a change. Although the same thing could be true, but the other way around. The reason why Doc Q might not be able to inflict truly horrendous diseases on people may be because he's not actually a doctor. I mean, anyone can call themselves a doctor. I mean, not legally, of course, but this is pirate land. There are no laws. Well, except for that one, but look, what's he gonna do? The dude hates bread. No one cares what he thinks. But as far as medical experience goes, we really only have Doc Q's word that he's a doctor. His entire character gimmick is a medical professional who is constantly sick to the point where he looks like he's on the verge of death. And much like the rest of the Blackbeard pirates, he could be a lying charlatan. And so when he's given a fruit that suits his lie, all he can come up with is wacky diseases, because he's not actually capable of investigating the fruit to a truly deadly level. However, the truth could also be much more sinister. There's currently only one example in the series where Doc Q's skills have allegedly been put to use for doctoring, and that was in chapter 803, when Jesus Burgess asked for Doc Q to be sent to Baltigo because he was, quote, badly wounded and on the brink of death. And since Burgess didn't end up doing the death, we've got to assume that Doc Q does have some skills. But given that he's a member of the Blackbeard Pirates, it would suggest that Doc Q, if he was an actual doctor, was probably prone to medical malpractice during his tenure. Kind of like how Lafitte used to work as a sheriff in West Blue, but heavily abused his position to inflict, quote, excessive cruelty and violence. So Doc Q could be abusing his medical knowledge for the sake of some sort of sick experimentation. The logic being that, it's no fun to give someone a known disease. I've seen that one. I know how it works. No, what Doc Q wants to do is afflict someone with a completely new condition. Or the truth could be significantly more tragic and gut-punching. I did say before that Doc Q's gimmick is being the doctor who's always sick. However, this is a condition that he was born with. When Luffy, Zoro, and Nami meet him on Jaya, Doc Q states that he was born with a weak constitution, some sort of chronic illness that means he's perpetually unable to stand unless it's a situation where he's withstanding Whitebeard's shockwaves, say during Marineford. Much like Blackbeard himself, Doc Q is an enigmatic contradiction, but one who could carry a pretty tragic past. Although his health status is also played for gags because his horse, now Pegasus Stronger, seems to have the exact same chronic illness. Another restriction that often comes up in fruit-based discussions is that of life force. Both Luffy and Law's fruit can be pushed to the extreme where it starts shaving off their life, and it's actually quite a common cost. Even Princess Mancherry's devil fruit, the Chiyu Chiyu no Mi, can reduce her lifespan, specifically when she heals inanimate objects and restores them to their original forms. It definitely wouldn't be surprising if Doc Q was subject to the same sort of limitation. The more potent and life-threatening of a disease it is he creates, the larger the cost on Doc Q's own life force, which, as we've established, is already incredibly minimal due to his chronic on the verge of death illness. So Doc Q might not be able to afford the cost of some of the more horrifying diseases, so he's stuck in this area of creating novelty afflictions. Stuff that doesn't necessarily harm the infected, but it's just weird and kind of confusing. Of course, there's plenty of room for other restrictions as well, such as perhaps Doc Q doesn't actually have control over what disease is inflicted, which is very much in keeping with his philosophy on fate, sort of like the apples he was offering to people on Jaya. But this fruit is classic One Piece. On paper, it breaks the series. A devil fruit with genuinely infinite versatility. And it's worse than usual as well, because you can out outright wield the effects of the vast majority of every other devil fruit, and even beyond that. It can seemingly conjure anything that the user can imagine as a disease. But luckily, it's in the hands of a wacky character with highly questionable motives and fits under the fun-loving philosophy of Eiichiro Oda. So whilst I don't ever expect this fruit to be truly devastating, I do expect the ability to be a ton of fun in the future.